Only managers, I have 3 reflective questions for you this morning. Now that we start a new year, now we have a little time for us to analyze how we're doing things. We reflect over the last year, how things went. And now that we start a new one, we're reflecting how things are going to go. But today's topic is about our finances. How am I dealing with my finances? Who cares how I deal with it? Ever thought about this? Who cares? Right? It's my money. I earned it. I can do whatever I want with it. Does God really cares where my treasure is? The answer is very straightforward, and God does care where your treasure is. The answer is found in Proverbs 21, verse 2. Let's open our Bibles to Proverbs chapter 21 and verse 2. And it says, "Every way of a man is right in his own eyes, but the Lord pondereth the hearts." In other words, he says he weighs the heart. Why is that important for us to God to weigh our hearts? Is there any connection with finances? The answer to that is also found in Matthew chapter 6 and verse 21. Some of you probably memorized this verse already. But chapter 6 and verse 21 reads, "For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." The reason why God cares where our treasure is because it tells him where our heart is. Why is it important for God to know where our heart is? First of all, because it is impossible to have 2 hearts. Ever thought about this? You only have one heart. And that heart that you have, you cannot divide in 2. Luke 16:13. Let's read that verse. Luke chapter 16 and verse 13. "No servant can serve 2 masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. He cannot serve God and mammon." And that means money or pursuit of gain. Now, how is this so important to God? I want you to put yourself in God's position right now. And one way for us to figure that out is to imagine the marriage life. How does God represent the church? He is the groom. The church is the bride, correct? Now, how does it work, the relationship between a husband and a wife? Can there be happiness in a home if there's cheating involved? You probably wonder why I'm asking this question. Where is the trust? Imagine yourself having a wife, or if you're a wife having a husband, and you know there's cheating involved. Can there be any trust in there? It's really hard and almost impossible. And that's why God cares about our hearts. Because where our treasure is shows where our heart is, and where our heart is shows how much we trust in him. The point to drive home is that finances for Christians is much more than the number that shows up in our bank account. It's much more than how many houses we have. In fact, it goes much deeper than we realize. Where our treasure is, where our treasure is, shows whom I serve and trust. I wanted to keep this thought in your mind as we go through the study. This is really important. So what is the thought? Where my treasure is shows whom I serve and trust. Now, a question for you, or for us to meditate. So what if I have something in this earth? Does it mean my treasure is here? Can there be any problems with this? With having things? Let's talk about the real value of things in this earth. Matthew chapter 6, verse 19. Let's open our Bibles to Matthew chapter 6 and verse 19. This verse has a command and also has an explanation why it is a command. It starts saying, "Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth." And as soon as you stop there, you might be thinking, well, why? Well, it says here, where moth and rust does corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. So first of all, there's a command that tells us not to, and explains why. Because it is uncertain and will get destroyed eventually. It's true. Whatever we have here, it is uncertain, and eventually will get destroyed. Because we cannot take anything with us. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 7, Paul telling Timothy something for him to remember. 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 7. For we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out. As you look into your possessions, the things that we have, one thing is for sure. All that we have at the end means nothing. Ever thought about this? Everything that we have eventually goes away. If it is really this bad, and that at the end the treasures in this earth means nothing, what should we do then? What is the course we take now? I mean, we know it's going to get destroyed. We know it's going to go away. What should we do? We got to change our focus. But I want to point out something that we humans have a tendency to do. Extremes. There's two extremes, and it's imperative that we talk about these extremes before we proceed. Because our tendency as humans, whether we like it or not, is to go to extremes. What are the two extremes when it comes to money? Can someone tell me, what are the two extremes? One can be what? Spend too much, riches. The other extreme? Poverty. So let's go to riches first. Besides the fact that at the end it amounts to nothing, what are some of the problems? Besides the physical aspect that is going to go away, what is the benefit, or what is not a benefit as a person when you have riches? If you had opened your Bibles before 1 Timothy 6, you probably read the verse already. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 9 and 10. And he reads, "But they that will be rich fall into the temptation and the snare, and into many foolish and hurtful lusts, which draw men into destruction and perdition. For the love of money is the root of evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith, and pierced themselves through with many, many sorrows." The reason why it affects us so much is because we have a hard time to have peace of mind. Well, first of all, you're afraid of losing it. You're afraid of someone taking from you. There's an endless pursuit of real happiness, but you never find it. Ever notice this? When a person is going after riches, going after gains, he's always going for it. He's trying hard. He gets a new house. You think he stops there? It doesn't stop there. Okay, now I need a yacht. And the yacht's not enough. I need to have a certain amount in my bank account. It's not enough. And you just keep... It gets to a point that it perverts you, and your desire for money overrules your moral principles. And that's when you start using the poor, is when you start collecting money that is not really yours. It reminds me of the rich young man. He came to Jesus. Why do you think he came to him? The rich man had everything he needed. But he sure knew that he was missing something. He came to Jesus and asked him, what should I do to gain heaven? He knew that the missing piece was heaven. He knew it. He knew that he needed. But as soon as he heard the voice of Jesus telling him, sell everything that you have and follow me, it touched a very specific part of his heart that he could not let go. Do you think he was happy after that? He was not happy before. He was certainly not happy afterwards. Matthew 26, verse 16. Let's ponder on this verse. Matthew chapter 26 and verse 16. I might have copied the wrong verse. But the verse says, for what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? Nothing. Literally, nothing. In Proverbs, we have another verse that tells us a story of a man of so much experience. Solomon went through everything. He got everything he wanted. And at the end, he came to this conclusion. Proverbs 23 and verse 4. Chapter 23 and verse 4. And he tells us, labor not to be rich, cease from thy own wisdom. At the end of his life, he realized that when you labor to be rich, you lose your wisdom, because what we have, you think you have. I urge you to read Ecclesiastes. As I was preparing the sermon, I have a tendency to read one verse and just keep reading. So I read one verse from Ecclesiastes, and I just kept reading. And it's amazing to see the conclusions that Solomon had in his end of his life. If you're struggling with how much you have or what to do with your money, read Ecclesiastes. Another extreme. Now we finished the rich part. Let's talk about some of the poverty. What is the problem with the poverty? Wouldn't it help us to be a little bit more humble? The tendency is for us to complain and be ungrateful. When we don't have enough, or at least when we don't think we have enough, we tend to complain. But Solomon is also wise again, and he wrote in Proverbs 30, verses 89. Proverbs chapter 30, verses 89. And he says, remove far from me vanity and lies. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with food convenient for me, lest I be full and deny thee, and say, who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal and take the name of my God in vain. Solomon here accomplishes both extremes that we're talking about. He's talking about when you're rich, what is your tendency? To become self-sufficient, say, who is God? And when you're poor, you also complain, who is God? He's not helping me. So now that we have two extremes here, how should we deal with treasures then? We know it amounts to nothing, but we cannot run away from it. I don't know if you realize, but it's everywhere. You need money to survive. You realize that? You have to go work, pay the bills, and you buy food. How do you deal with it? And I must confess that I was struggling a little bit in this preparation of this sermon, because I was myself trying to find a balance. And I read verses and verses and talk about how we shouldn't think too much of riches, but then that you shouldn't be poor. What do? You stop working? No, you can't. You need to work. Do you go for investments to gain money? No, it's not really necessary. So what do? And I had an aha moment. After much reading, I came to a conclusion. The reason why we sometimes struggle with money and how to find a balance is because we forget something very important. We forget that we are only managers, not owners. Amen. When you come to that conclusion that you don't own anything, only managing, those worries goes away. And then we remember that God owns it all. He literally does own everything. Our worries about how much we should invest, how much we should save, all goes away. Because we know that God owns it all. And that if we need anything, He will provide to us. Let's read Psalms chapter 24, verse 1. That is a beautiful conclusion that David come to. Psalms 24 and verse 1. And he reads, "The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, the world, and they that dwell therein." I don't know if you realize, but this verse says that even ourselves are His. We don't even own ourselves. But how do we know we're only managers? We know that God owns everything, but what is our part when it comes to that? 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 10. Here is telling us what God is doing, and is also telling us what He expects us to do with what He does. With what He does. 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 10. And it says, "As every man hath received the gift, even so minister the same only to another, as good," what? "Stewards of the manifold grace of God." In another version, it says, "Each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms." What happens when we view ourselves as managers, as stewards? How do we behave and think? How do you think managers behave and think? Do you think that they own everything? No, at the end of the month, they need to come to their bosses and say, "Hey, this is how the finances are going. And everything that I did was, what is the purpose? Is to grow myself, to grow my salary, or is it to grow the company? It's to grow the company." So there's four things that happens to our thinking when we think as managers, when we start living as managers. The first one of all, become grateful and content. We start to understand that God provides everything that we need, and our desires are the same Let's open our Bibles to Philippians chapter 4 and verses 12 and 13. I don't know if you realize, but being content alters how we view life. Ever thought about this? If you're content, you don't look at your neighbor. You don't look at how everyone is doing. You're happy, and you don't depend on anyone. So let's read verse 12 and 13. It says, I know both how to be abased, and I know how to abound everywhere and in all things. I am instructed both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to serve for need. And Paul tells us the secret of his contentment. I can do all things through Christ who strengtheneth me. Having trust that we always have what we need when we rely on God. Another point that changes in your life when you become a manager is you start giving willingly. Have you noticed sometimes that when we're thinking of the things that we have as if we won, as we own everything, when someone tells us to give something, how do we feel? I don't want to give. I worked so hard. I worked the whole week. Now you ask me to give? 1 Timothy 6 and verse 18. I don't know if you noticed, but we're reading a lot of 1 Timothy here. It should be a hint to you, or to us, to read these passages when Paul is instructing Timothy. 1 Timothy 6 and verse 18. That they do good, that they be rich in good works, ready to distribute, willing to communicate. Here Paul is saying that we need to be what? Rich in good works, ready to distribute, and willing to communicate. Here's what happens when you think as managers. Are you willing to give away the possessions if your boss asks you? If you don't own, you're not attached to it. Imagine your boss comes to you, hey, write a check to this person in the name of the company. What do? You don't even think about it. You go ahead and write it, send it over. Now, when it's your check, when it's coming from your paycheck, what do? It changes the perspective, doesn't it? When we understand that we're only managers of the things that we have, when it comes to giving, our hearts won't be tied up to possessions because we know that at the end, it's not ours. It reminds me in the time of Paul, when the Christians were so energetic about the gospel. Do you remember what they did? They sold everything they had. They brought to the disciples and said, give to the one that need. Do you think we need to come to that in life? To be able to give everything that we have if God asks? We can surely do this if we think as managers. Now the third point, and this is a very critical one, because the tendency as humans is for us to dismiss this a little bit. When you think as a managers, you enjoy the blessings. Because this is what happens. We need to remove the misconception that we are to live miserably, giving everything that we have at all times. That if I'm enjoying what I've been giving, to me, it means that I'm being selfish. Isn't that the thought sometimes? Ever thought about this? That when we hear this message, we need to give it all, or we need to be ready to give, it comes to a point in life that we may think, well, what is it for me to enjoy then? But God, He's a wonderful God. He gives everything that we need and even more. 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 17. And he says, charge them that are rich in this world, that they be not high-minded, not trusting in certain riches, but in the living God, who giveth us richly all things for what? To enjoy. This is God's word. He's saying to us that he gives everything for us to enjoy. Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 24. I really like Ecclesiastes. I really do. It really puts us in perspective what truly matters in life. Ecclesiastes chapter 2 and verse 24. Chapter 2 and verse 24. And he reads, there is nothing better for a man than that he should eat and drink, and that he should make his soul enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw, that it was from the hand of God. It is God's desire for us to enjoy our work, for us to enjoy our reward. And that means that we enjoy our reward whenever he asks us to give it away. We gladly give it away. Whenever he gives to us, we gladly receive. Fourth one, our salary is a gift. Understanding that even though we worked hard, we still need to give account to the real owner. Because who gave us the strength to work? Have you heard so many times people saying, I worked so hard this week. I worked so hard this month. This next paycheck is going to be all mine. I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to use it all. And there's no one who's going to come to me and say that I need to give account for that. It's mine. But that person forgets that God was the one that gave that person the energy to accomplish the tasks. Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 17 and 18. Deuteronomy chapter 8 and verse 17 and 18. And thou say in thy heart, my power and the might of my hand have got me this wealth. Isn't that what I just said? But thou shalt remember the Lord thy God, for it is he that giveth thee power to get wealth, that he may establish his covenant which he swore unto thy father, as it is this day. God is reminding us that whatever he gives us is because he gave us power to it. And we need to bring back to him. As we think of as managers, God has left also promises for us if we do behave as truthful servants, truthful managers. He has promises to us. He's not going to leave you behind. Hebrews 13 and verse 5. This is a promise that I don't know if you realize, but sometimes managers go through some rough periods of time. Sometimes the business is not doing well. Sometimes you have to struggle a little bit, have to put some things aside. You saw not long ago when COVID was hitting hard, what companies did. They had to lay off, right? They have to diminish the expenses. Sometimes we in our lives have to do that as managers. We have to think about the things that we're spending too much and reduce the costs. But God is merciful, and he promises that even though we might go through those phases, even in those phases, he always going to provide what we need. Every time. We might not always have what we want, but we will have what we need. Hebrews 13 and verse 5. This is a beautiful promise that we need to remind ourselves of every time we come to those circumstances. And it says, let your conversation be without covetousness, and be what? Be content with such things as ye have, for he hath said, I will never leave thee, nor forsake thee. Another promise is that God won't forget what we have done out of love. Hebrews 6 and verse 10. Just a few pages back. For God is not unrighteous to forget your work and labor of love, which ye have shewed toward his name, in that ye have ministered to the saints and do minister. He's saying that God is not going to forget the things that you did in the past and the things that you still do. Never to stop doing those things. In conclusion, as managers, it comes to a realization that God cares for what we do with our treasures, with the things that we have in our hands. It shows where our heart is and whom we serve. By being content and grateful, by being generous with others, by enjoying what is in our hands to manage, not to feel the struggle, but by recognizing that God is the source of our everything. Let us not forget in this new year that God has promised to sustain us with everything that we need if our heart is filled with his love, whether giving or receiving. And remember, the secret to keep in mind is to live as a manager, not as an owner. Amen.